Most people grow up making a quiet promise. I'll never be like them with money. I'll never stress the way they did. I'll never fight about money. I'll never make the same mistakes. And yet, years later, many people find themselves repeating the same patterns. Different income, different era, different details. Same emotional cycle. This is one of the most confusing experiences in adulthood because it feels like betrayal. Betrayal of your intentions, betrayal of your self-image, betrayal of the future you imagined. And people don't understand why it happens. They assume it means they weren't serious, or they're weak, or they secretly agree with those behaviors. That's not what's happening. Repetition is not agreement, it's conditioning. Let's start with the most important truth. You don't inherit your parents' money behaviors consciously. You inherit them neurologically. Children don't just watch behavior, they internalize emotional responses. How adults reacted to money, what emotions appeared, what was avoided, what caused tension, those reactions become default wiring. So even when your beliefs change, your nervous system still runs the old program. Now let's talk about the promise itself. When children say, "I'll never do that," they're responding to pain, stress, fear, arguments, instability. But that promise is made cognitively. The behavior is stored emotionally, and emotional memory is stronger than intention. Now let's talk about familiarity. The nervous system is drawn to what feels familiar, not what feels healthy. Familiar environments feel predictable. Predictable feels safe, even if the environment is stressful. So when adulthood introduces uncertainty, the nervous system reaches for known patterns, overspending after stress, avoiding money conversations, fighting about finances, panic during instability, not because these patterns are good, but because they are known. Now let's talk about emotional inheritance. Parents pass down more than habits. They pass down emotional regulation strategies. If your parents panicked, you learned panic. If they avoided, you learned avoidance. If they used money to soothe emotions, you learned spending. These strategies were survival tools. You didn't choose them. They chose you. Now let's talk about role repetition. Many children take on emotional roles in response to money stress. The caretaker, the peacekeeper, the fix-keeper, the invisible one. Those roles don't dissolve with age. They mature. The caretaker becomes the adult who overgives financially. The peacekeeper avoids necessary money conversations. The fixer tries to solve every financial problem immediately. The invisible one avoids money entirely. You didn't copy your parents. You copied the role you learned to play around them. Now let's talk about rebellion. Some people don't repeat their parents' behavior directly. They repeat it in reverse. If parents were frugal, they overspend. If parents avoided money, they obsess over it. If parents controlled everything, they reject structure. This feels like freedom, but it's still reactive, and reactive behavior is still controlled by the past. Now let's talk about emotional echoes. Certain financial moments activate childhood emotion instantly. Opening bills, discussing debt, making large purchases, facing uncertainty. Your adult brain may understand the situation. Your nervous system remembers something else, and it reacts first. Now let's talk about shame. When people notice themselves repeating patterns, shame appears. I said I wouldn't do this. What's wrong with me? Why can't I break free? Shame tightens the loop. It reinforces secrecy, avoidance, self-criticism, which are often the very patterns learned in childhood. Now let's talk about why knowledge doesn't stop repetition. You can read books, watch videos, understand psychology, but repetition happens in moments of emotion, not moments of reflection. So the key is not more information, it's awareness in the moment. Now let's talk about interruption. Patterns don't disappear, they are interrupted. Interruption happens when you notice, this reaction feels familiar. This isn't about now. This is old. That pause creates choice, not perfection. Choice, Now let's talk about nervous system updating. The nervous system updates through experience, not explanation. Each calm money conversation, each bill paid without panic, each boundary held without guilt. These experiences slowly rewrite the program. Now let's talk about loyalty again. Some repetition is driven by unconscious loyalty. If my parents struggled, succeeding feels wrong. If money caused pain, wanting more feels dangerous. Breaking patterns can feel like betrayal. This emotional conflict must be acknowledged, not ignored. Now let's talk about compassion. You cannot shame yourself out of a pattern you learn to survive. You must understand it first. Compassion loosens grip. Understanding creates space. Now let's talk about conscious inheritance. Breaking cycles doesn't mean rejecting your parents. It means choosing what to carry forward. Resilience, work ethic, care, and leaving behind fear, panic, and silence. Now let's talk about the generational shift. When one person breaks the emotional money cycle, they don't just change behavior, they change what normal looks like. Calm replaces chaos. Conversation replaces avoidance. Intentionality replaces reaction. Now let's talk about the final truth. You repeat your parents' money mistakes, not because you failed, but because you learned them before you had a choice. Now you do have a choice, not to erase the past, not to fight it, but to respond differently, gently, consistently, with awareness. That's how cycles break, not in one dramatic moment, but in hundreds of small, quiet decisions where you choose safety over familiarity. And that's how the promise you made as a child is finally kept, not by force, but by understanding. There's another reason people repeat their parents' money mistakes that feels especially hard to admit. Those patterns once kept the family together. Even when money caused stress, the behaviors around it created a kind of emotional glue. Arguments meant engagement. Silence meant protection. Control meant stability. Avoidance meant survival. As children, these patterns weren't just observed, they were belonging strategies. So when you repeat them as an adult, part of you isn't managing money. Part of you is staying connected. This is why breaking the pattern can feel lonely, not because the behavior was good, but because it was relational. Now let's talk about the fear underneath change. When you imagine handling money differently, your nervous system doesn't just imagine better outcomes, it imagines separation. What if I outgrow them? What if my life no longer fits? What if success creates distance? These fears are rarely conscious, but they're powerful, and they keep people emotionally tethered to old financial roles. Now let's talk about timing. Most repetition happens under stress, when life feels uncertain, when money feels tight, when decisions feel urgent. Stress collapses the nervous system back into early learning. You don't rise to your ideals, you fall to your conditioning. That's not failure, that's biology. Now let's talk about the illusion of control. Many people believe, if I think hard enough, I can stop this. But thinking doesn't reach the nervous system. Experience does. The body must learn, this situation is different now. I'm safe responding differently. Nothing bad happened. That learning takes repetition. Now let's talk about patience. Breaking generational money patterns takes longer than people expect, not because it's hard intellectually, but because the system being updated learns slowly too. Years of repetition created it. Months of awareness won't erase it, and that's okay. Now let's talk about self-trust again. Every time you interrupt a familiar reaction, you build trust. Not because you were perfect, but because you noticed. Noticing is the beginning of change. Now let's talk about grief again, but more gently. Grief often appears when patterns loosen. Grief for the version of your parents who struggled. Grief for the child who carried stress too early. Grief for years spent reacting instead of choosing. This grief is not a setback, it's integration. Now let's talk about the moment things finally shift. For many people, it's not dramatic. They simply realize, I didn't panic this time. I didn't avoid the conversation. I didn't spend to soothe myself. The old pattern didn't disappear. It just didn't run the show. Now let's talk about the new pattern. The new pattern doesn't feel exciting. It feels boring, predictable, uneventful. And that's the sign it's working. Because drama was never growth. Drama was familiarity. Now let's talk about the final reframe. Repeating your parents' money mistakes doesn't mean you're doomed. It means you learn deeply. And learning deeply means you can unlearn deeply too. But unlearning doesn't look like rebellion. It looks like calm. Now let's close with the deepest truth of this video. You didn't fail to keep your promise. You just didn't understand what you were promising yet. You weren't promising different numbers. You were promising different emotions. Less fear, less chaos, less silence. And that promise is kept not by rejecting your past, but by responding to the present with awareness instead of reflex. Each time you pause, each time you choose calm over familiarity, each time you handle money without reenacting old roles, you're not just changing your future. You're closing a loop that started long before you had words for it. And that is one of the quietest, bravest forms of success there is.